Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. In Trump's New York criminal trial, Michael Cohen taking the stand for a second day of testimony. He tells the jury why he lied for the former president. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards has the latest.
After weeks of testimony about former President Trump's involvement in paying off a former adult film actress, the prosecution in the Trump New York criminal case on Tuesday focused on the charges in the indictment: falsification of business records. Their star witness, Michael Cohen, returned to the stand for a second day of testimony. He testified that Trump created false business records to hide that he was reimbursing Cohen for the $130,000 payment to Stormy Daniels. Cohen said he sent invoices in 2017 to the Trump organization and falsely wrote retainer agreement. He explained that there wasn't any retainer agreement in 2017 because he only did less than 10 hours of work for Trump that year. But he said Trump signed 11 checks containing the retainer agreement notation, even though the payments were actually reimbursements. Will the jury assume that Trump falsified business records? If they do, the prosecution will also have to convince them that Trump paid false invoices in furtherance of a second crime. And that crime seems to be a campaign finance violation. Cohen testified that he was very loyal to Trump and would often lie to protect his boss, even lying to the Federal Election Commission about that $130,000 payment. Cohen said he told the FEC that neither the Trump organization nor the Trump campaign was involved in that Daniels payment. And it wasn't a campaign donation, he said. But it was all a lie, he said, to protect Trump. While the judge cautioned the jury to disregard Cohen's testimony about lying to the FEC to protect Trump, the jury can't unhear it. Cohen is expected to be cross-examined by the defense on Thursday. Arlene Richards reporting from the criminal courthouse in Manhattan.
Cohen faced cross-examination starting around 2 p.m. this afternoon. Trump's team tried to frame him as out to get Trump. Cohen admitted that the New York DA's office told him to stop talking about the case on media outlets, and yet he didn't stop. He also said he made about $3.4 million from his two books, Disloyal and Revenge. Yet he said it's not fair to say he's motivated by fame or publicity. Cohen also admitted that he met with the DA's office to prepare his testimony. He said he hopes Trump is convicted and admitted to talking about that on his personal podcast. Trump attorney Todd Blanche said he should be able to wrap up the cross-examination by the end of the day Thursday. And several members of Congress are in Manhattan today in a show of support for Trump that says the former president's legal battle becomes a rallying point for his supporters. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more.
House Speaker Mike Johnson and other Republican members of Congress joined Trump and his allies in Manhattan today, coming to his defense in the so-called hush money trial. They call this case and the others against Trump a form of election interference.
They are doing this intentionally to keep him here and keep him off of the campaign trail.
This is draining down assets and resources that can be utilized by the president to continue to forge ahead, to build a stronger economy, to secure our border, and to get our nation back on track.
The only crime that's happening here is this Democrat judge and the Democrat Party prosecuting their political rival right in the middle of a presidential election.
The politicization of the legal system is not working. It's actually failing.
And when you have a prosecutor who campaigned on the pledge of going after Trump and then keeps his campaign pledge, when you have a judge whose kids are collecting money from Democratic operatives by fundraising off the very trial that that judge is presiding over, and then telling the U.S. president that he's subject to a gag order.
The prosecution's case hinges on former Trump attorney Michael Cohen's testimony. Now, in 2016, Cohen paid adult film star Stormy Daniels $130,000 to keep her from going public about an alleged affair that she had with Trump. Trump denies all allegations and says the payment to Cohen was a legal expense, but prosecutors allege Trump falsified these records. In 2018, Cohen pled guilty to tax fraud and lying under oath to Congress. Now, outside of the courtroom, Cohen has been antagonizing and taunting Trump, but Trump is unable to respond in kind due to a gag order.
The gag order has to come off. So when you ask me a question about the people that we're talking about, I'm not allowed to answer.
We're 5 weeks into the hush money trial, and the hearing portion of it is expected to wrap up later this month. Now, this is the only major trial against Trump that's expected to wrap up before the November election. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Ukraine today on a surprise visit. This as Russia pushes a new ground offensive in northeastern Ukraine. Blinken spoke at a university in Kyiv earlier today. NTD's Sean Marshall has the latest.
I have come to Ukraine with a message. You are not alone.
The main objective of Blinken's surprise trip is to pledge continued support for Ukraine. The secretary says Russia's latest offensive in the northeastern Kharkiv region is being supported by weapons from countries like China, Iran, and North Korea. The operation is the most significant border incursion since the early days of the war. Blinken added that the coming weeks will be very demanding for Ukrainians. But he said that the $60 billion aid package passed by Congress proves that America will support Kyiv.
And a significant majority of Americans believe we should continue to provide assistance to Ukraine.
Blinken acknowledged that it might still take some time for the approved aid to get to Ukraine. The secretary first flew to Poland, where he landed on Monday, and then traveled to Kyiv using an overnight train. On Tuesday morning, the secretary met Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky thanked Blinken and the U.S. for the recently passed aid package. But he also renewed requests for Patriot missile air defense systems.
Really, we need today 2 Patriots for Kharkiv region, because the people are under attack.
The U.S. is not committing to send Patriot systems at this time. A senior U.S. official on Tuesday said artillery, air defense, interceptors, and long-range ballistic missiles have already been delivered. Blinken also met with the Prime Minister of Ukraine and the country's foreign minister. He ended the night by singing and playing the guitar at a nightclub in Kyiv.
The United States is with you. So much of the world is with you.
And in related news, Russian President Vladimir Putin will make a 2-day state visit to China this week. It's the latest show of unity between the two authoritarian allies. Putin will meet Chinese leader Xi Jinping during the visit. The Kremlin confirmed the planned trip, saying Putin was going at Xi's invitation. The trip is scheduled to start on Thursday. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
House GOP leadership plans to force lawmakers to take a position on President Biden's foreign and domestic policies. And Maryland's Senate primary race has exposed some difficulties for Democrats. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more.
The House Rules Committee began on Tuesday the markup of the Israel Security Assistance Support Act. The bill would force the Biden administration to ship to Israel within 15 days any congressionally approved security aid that is being withheld by the White House. Senate Republicans also asked the president to reconsider his policy on pausing arms shipments to Israel.
Mr. President, if you do not change this policy, you will have destroyed the last best chance to deliver lasting stability in the Mideast for generations. Bottom line, there's a lot at stake here. I think the region and the world is going to second guess future relationships with us, Mr. President, if you don't change your mind.
On the Senate side, Senators John Fetterman from Pennsylvania and John Tester from Montana have also denounced the president's Israel policy. And in the House of Representatives, 26 Democrats, led by Congressman Jared Golden and Josh Gothenmeyer, sent a letter to the White House urging the quick delivery of aid to Israel. The Israel Security Assistance Support Act will be put to a vote on the House floor on Wednesday, along with a resolution condemning Biden's border policies. In Maryland, this Tuesday's Senate primary race has become one of the most crucial in the nation. Democrats, despite having twice as many registered voters in the state of Maryland, have both their Senate primary candidates trailing presumptive Republican nominee, former Governor Larry Hogan. Hogan leads Democrat Senate candidates Congressman David Trone and Prince George's County Executive Angela Alsobrooks by double digits, and Democrats could lose the traditionally blue Senate seat. And lastly, on Tuesday, the House of Representatives is expected to pass the FAA reauthorization bill for another 5 years, allocating $105 billion for the agency. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Staying on the Hill, two top lawmakers in the House are taking steps to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee Jim Jordan says Garland has failed to comply with congressional subpoenas. Congressman James Comer has scheduled a hearing this week to advance a contempt resolution. Despite the subpoenas, the Department of Justice has declined to provide audio tapes of President Biden's interview with special counsel Robert Hur. Hur said in his report that Biden intentionally kept and disclosed classified materials after his vice presidency ended. The report also said Biden repeatedly consulted the documents after leaving office. The Department of Justice did not respond to a request for comment. Who's tougher on China? President Biden hiking tariffs on Chinese imports, while Trump says he's the one who started it. The two, however, differ in their exact approaches to protecting American industries. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more from the White House.
President Biden on Tuesday announced that he's raising tariffs on an array of Chinese imports, in particular in strategic industries, and that includes tripling tariffs on steel and aluminum to 25%, doubling the rate on semiconductors to 50%, and quadrupling tariffs on Chinese EVs to 100%. And President Biden says that's to punish China for its unfair trade practices that hurt American businesses. Watch.
China heavily subsidized all these products, pushing Chinese companies to produce far more than the rest of the world can absorb, and then dumping the excess products onto the market at unfairly low prices, driving other manufacturers around the world out of business. It's not competition, it's cheating.
The Biden administration also announced that it's now officially keeping the over $300 billion worth of tariffs imposed on China by Trump. It comes as both Biden and Trump are trying to appeal to voters as the tougher on China candidates, sometimes using strikingly similar rhetoric.
Europe is being flooded with Chinese cars, but I'm not going to allow it to happen in our car and truck industry.
They're driving manufacturing companies out of business in Europe, but we won't let that happen here in America.
The White House says Trump's tariffs are too broad, while Biden's are effective and targeted and will not raise prices on American consumers. But former President Trump this morning says Biden's new tariffs are too little, too late.
I guess they should have done it a long time ago, but they've also got to do it on other vehicles, and they have to do it on a lot of other products, because China's eating our lunch right now.
And as the Chinese government is trying to rely on a surge of exports to revive its slumping economic growth, the new tariffs can really not only deal a blow to China's global ambitions in strategic industries, but also thwart that means of revival for the Chinese economy. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
In related news, an order from President Biden is now blocking a Chinese-backed firm from owning land near an American nuclear missile base, citing national security concerns. The White House on Monday gave the company 4 months to sell its property that's within 1 mile from the Francis E. Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. It's home to part of the U.S. nuclear arsenal and also many intercontinental ballistic missiles. The company in question here is a cryptocurrency miner called Mine One Partners. According to the White House, it's owned by Chinese nationals. The United States is increasingly concerned about the national security risks posed by Chinese-led purchases of American property near sensitive military sites. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Earlier, I spoke with Democratic strategist David Carlucci to get his perspective on former President Trump's allies showing up in court to show support. David Carlucci, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Great to be with you.
Now, as a Democratic strategist, how are you viewing this move by Trump's allies?
Yeah, I see this as The Apprentice Part 2, right? This is the Trump show. And what a difference 7 years makes, right? Now you have a former president sitting on trial, and Republicans are not trying to distance themselves. They're trying to ingratiate themselves to the former president because what Donald Trump values above anything else is just loyalty to him, not to the Constitution, as we know with Mike Pence and January 6th, not to our country or to constituents, but to himself and only to himself, Donald Trump. And so you see these politicians rolling out from all across the country. What do they have in common? They are vying to be an ally of Donald Trump and to be in his cabinet. to be his vice president or to just curry good favor with a potential future president.
Now, on that note, do you see this as lending validity to the argument that a former president or presidential frontrunner in this case should not be prosecuted in the first place to avoid it becoming a political spectacle, if you will?
Well, I don't think we can do that. I think, you know, you hear Republicans claiming it's a political spectacle. Well, they're making it a political spectacle. How can we not prosecute someone when they've broken the law, whether they're a former president, whether they are the president? I think it's just absolutely wild that you have someone running for president and is the GOP nominee that would even attempt to say that the president has absolute immunity. It totally spits in the face of our founding fathers and our Constitution, which the intent is that no one is above the law, especially a president, especially a politician. So I think this is a really bad time for Republicans. It's setting a really bad precedent that they will just follow someone to all ends, no matter what it does in terms of the precedent and the ramifications for our nation and what we stand for. I think it's a real slippery slope, and I think Republicans are going to wake up, whether it's a month or a few years from now, and say what happened and totally try to undo this very dark episode that we see with the GOP right now.
Zooming out a bit, how is this trial changing the American politics but also political campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is unfortunate because I think a lot of people are not looking at the facts of the case. They want to either say that Donald Trump is the victim or that he should be, you know, put in bars for whatever reason. So I think, unfortunately, a lot of people are not looking at the details, but just looking at the overall ramifications of having a former president sitting through a trial. So I think, unfortunately, it does ratchet up that partisanship that we see in this country today. But I'm hopeful that we reach the pinnacle of that and we start to come back together to say, look, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, we need to try to see each other through each other's lens and try to sympathize and understand where we're coming from. Even though we might disagree, I find that the best legislation is written when there is compromise. And compromise, unfortunately, has turned into a dirty word on the left and the right. But compromise is what makes things possible and what our nation is founded on. And I think we need to get back to that logic.
And what about the trust in the judicial system, especially among many Trump supporters? You're seeing them note, say, inconsistencies when it comes to dealing with President Biden and his family business dealings with, say, China or Hunter Biden and Burisma. How do you see that trust in the judicial system?
Well, I think they're doing everything possible to try to tear it apart. Look, Donald Trump is spending his time after these court appearances in his press gaggle complaining about the judge, complaining about the Department of Justice, making unsubstantiated claims that the judge is corrupt and that it's a Democratic scheme. I mean, this judge was originally appointed by a Republican mayor of New York years ago. But it's just amazing that you have someone that is the presidential nominee for the Republican Party, a former president, just disparaging the judicial system because it's against him. But what I found, there's a pattern with Donald Trump. Anything that doesn't go his way is somehow corrupt. And it doesn't matter if it's the DOJ, if it's the election system, if it's a courthouse in Manhattan. If it doesn't go his way, you're the enemy, you're wrong, you're corrupt, and there's no other way about it. And I think that's a real small, narrow way to think, and it's a dangerous path.
David Carlucci, thank you so much for your time.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
And we'll be hearing another perspective on the Trump case in the second half of the show. What does a senior advisor to Trump and former federal prosecutor have to say about the trial? Stay tuned for that coming up. And we have some breaking news. We have new information about the cargo ship that crashed into Baltimore's Francis Scott Key Bridge. The ship, the Dali, lost power twice while docked the day before the catastrophic accident, according to the National Transportation Safety Board investigation. And on the day of, here's what happened. When the ship was approaching the bridge, 2 circuit breakers were tripped, causing several pumps to stop working. Those pumps powered the ship's only propeller and rudder, and the emergency generator wasn't set up to power the whole ship. Turning to a deadly accident in Florida today, 8 people are dead and 40 others critically injured when a pickup truck hit a bus carrying farm workers. The driver of the truck has been arrested on charges of driving under the influence. Police on the scene say the bus was side-swiped by the truck around 6:30 a.m. this morning near an intersection in the north central Florida. The bus was carrying 53 people. The side swipe caused the bus to crash through a fence and roll down an embankment. The workers were traveling to a farm about an hour north of Orlando. The road where the crash occurred remains closed as investigators determine the cause of the accident. California's governor is planning to close out the state's budget deficit over the next 2 years, but health officials don't want budget cuts, and lawmakers wonder whether the billions spent on homelessness were effective. NTD's David Lamb reports.
California's Governor Gavin Newsom introduced a plan to close this year's remaining $27.6 billion shortfall and next year's projected $28.4 billion deficit. The biggest reduction is a $2 billion reduction in broadband, which are for projects that fund internet access across the state.
We've been stress testing our broadband strategy in the middle mile and the last mile, and we think we've come up with a plan to actually achieve similar goals at a lower cost. So we think it's appropriate to claw back those dollars without a diminution in terms of programming and advancing the commitments that we've made.
Other cuts in the governor's May revision proposal include $300 million in public health departments. But health officials push back on that, saying it's a step backward. And recently, some state officials questioned the state's homelessness council on spending and how effective it's been. Around $20 billion was spent addressing homelessness.
We spent billions of dollars, and you can't tell us at all how many people we've helped.
Apologies, I don't have the information in front of me to share.
You have it in your office?
Again, we're working through data quality issues in order to finalize the report.
In April, the state auditor's report found that the Homelessness Council has financial info covering its 2018 to 2021 fiscal year, but it has not continued to track and report this data since that time, despite the significant amount of additional funding the state awarded to these efforts in the past 2 years. The Council on Homelessness says the homeless programs have been evolving and the data should be available in a few weeks. As for the budget, the California Finance Department told NTD the proposal still protects core programs from large cuts. The expansion of health care under Medi-Cal to all residents is not reduced, and no cuts are proposed to the support levels for the state's Welfare to Work program. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
Worldwide birth rates are declining. It's now predicted that in 15 years, 3/4 of the world's countries won't have enough babies to sustain population size. NTD's Dave Martin breaks down the data.
Birth rates worldwide are dropping. The population would remain stable if, on average, every woman had 2 or more children. The children would statistically replace the population. This is the replacement rate. The U.S.'s replacement rate is currently at 1.6, the EU 1.46. In many Asian countries, it's either under or slightly higher than 1. The lowest, South Korea, at 0.72.
And the economic consequences are, quite frankly, going to be devastating. The population is going to be cut almost in half in each generation.
Steve Mosier is the president of the Population Research Institute. He says these countries are literally dying because couples are not having kids. China's rate is nearing 1, partially because of its one-child policy, which lasted 35 years and even forced abortions. Mosier believes China may soon force pregnancy.
The Chinese Communist Party has already ordered young members of the Chinese Communist Party to marry and have 3 children. But I think those exhortations, that encouragement to have 3 children, will be imposed on the population as a whole in the years to come. And it may become coercive.
The solution, Mosier believes governments should shelter young childbearing couples from taxes, like exempting them from income and payroll taxes. He says the money is better spent raising the next generation. This is Dave Martin for NTD News.
Joining me now to offer his perspective on this move by Trump's allies is Kash Patel. He is senior advisor to Trump for national security, defense, and intelligence, and also a former federal prosecutor. Kash, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you again. To begin, what do today's court appearances signal about the dynamics of the Republican Party and the level of support for Trump within its ranks?
I think it's great to be with you. I think from the political aspect, you see a cohesion that has really not been seen before in the Republican movement, and it's behind the leadership of Donald Trump and his reshaping of the Republican Party. And what he has done is he has used the deep state's weapon of choice against them, the two-tier system of justice that they are using to carry out this vindictive weaponized form of prosecution. He is utilizing it as a platform to say, look, Republicans, and not just Republicans, this is happening to me. Everyone sees the unlawful conduct in it, and this is why the legions of Republicans, politicians, and everyday Americans are flowing to Donald Trump to say, you were right. This is unlawful. I don't want to live in this America, and this is why they support him. And I think it's only going to grow.
And Kash, this trial has become a campaign issue for both Republicans and Democrats. Is this politicization inevitable in a situation like this with a former president and presidential frontrunner being prosecuted?
I wouldn't say inevitable, yes, because of the history. So if we rewind the clock and take a piece out of my former life, I led the Russiagate investigation for Congress. And back then, we exposed that the FBI and DOJ lied to a federal court to unlawfully surveil President Trump and his campaign. But that investigation was initiated by Hillary Clinton's illegal use of campaign funds that were hidden as legal payments to go out and hire a foreign intelligence asset to funnel that information into the FBI. She was never prosecuted for it. I bring it up today because she was never prosecuted for an actual illegal act, and Donald Trump here is being prosecuted for using his own money for lawful purposes. And since none of the actors were held accountable, it's no surprise to me that the government gangsters in this deep state picked up the breadcrumbs of that conspiracy and now are applying it on steroids to Donald Trump in terms of weaponizing a system of justice. This is what happens when there's a lack of accountability and people are tired of it.
Expanding on that, given that you are a former federal prosecutor, what is your view on this hush money case in New York, given that the prosecution has not spelled out the exact felony crime that they allege Trump has committed?
It's pretty simple. When you're a prosecutor or public defender, you look at the elements of the law. And in this case, you apply the facts. There is no hush and there is no money. Donald Trump, secretary, labeled legal funds as a legal payment and recorded that in the ledger while he was president of the United States. Those facts have been proven. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing illegal about that. And Alvin Bragg's own office has admitted that there were no FEC violations like there were with Hillary Clinton when she illegally used campaign dollars and masqueraded them as legal expenditures to write the Steele dossier. Here, the government themselves have admitted that the internal nexus they need to make this a crime does not exist, in that there is no FEC violation. The DOJ never charged him. The FEC never charged him. The SEC never charged him. No one did. And so Alvin Bragg is really basically making it up out of whole cloth, and America seeing it because the facts speak for themselves, and the law is on the side of Donald Trump, as are the facts, and this is why he should be unequivocally exonerated.
And how do you see this trial changing American politics?
I think this is a monumental shift for many Americans that would normally not participate in politics. It has grasped everybody from coast to coast and around the world. It is forcing people to say, if the government at the state and federal level is willing to do this to the Republican nominee for the presidency of the United States, what are they going to do to my neighbor? What are they going to do to my aunt? What about my uncle? What about my relatives or friends? What if I decide that I want to sign up and serve this country in some form or shape? Are they going to expose me because they disagree with what I stand for? Everyday Americans, as you saw in New Jersey and Wildwood this week, when 100,000 people showed up to support Donald Trump, are more energized than ever because Donald Trump is producing a constitutional form of government that this country has lacked since Joe Biden took office. And he's showing them that the weaponized decision of justice will no longer apply should he be elected the president. And I think everyday Americans love that.
Kash Patel, Senior Advisor to Trump for National Security, Defense, and Intelligence, and former federal prosecutor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much. Have a great evening.
Jury selection resumed today in Senator Bob Menendez's corruption trial. Prosecutors accused the senator of a years-long bribery scheme to help foreign governments disrupt criminal cases and enrich himself. The Democratic senator from New Jersey has pleaded not guilty in Manhattan federal court to 16 criminal charges. Jury selection began on Monday, and the judge told jurors that the trial could last through June. Several dozen were excused from the case. Prosecutors have accused Menendez and his wife of accepting several $100,000 of cash and gold bars, plus a Mercedes-Benz convertible. In exchange, they allege Menendez provided political favors and aid to the governments of Egypt and Qatar. FBI agents who searched the Menendez home in June 2022 found much of the cash hidden inside clothing, closets, and a safe, according to the prosecutors. Voters in 3 states, Maryland, Nebraska, and West Virginia, go to the polls today. NTD's Daniel Monahan has more on what's at stake in the primaries, with control of various state and federal offices on the line.
The contests for president will be largely uneventful, as former President Donald Trump and President Biden are already their party's presumptive nominees. In Maryland, voters will choose nominees for 8 U.S. House seats, a Senate seat, and their pick for president. The Senate contest is garnering interest, with popular former Republican Governor Larry Hogan entering the contest at the last minute. The dark blue state hasn't elected a Republican senator for nearly half a century, but Hogan has even led his Democratic rivals in some polls. Voters in West Virginia will also be selecting their nominees today. The big contest in the state is for the Senate. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin announced earlier this year that he won't be seeking re-election. President Trump won the state by nearly 40 points in 2020, so the odds are strong that Republicans could flip the seat. 2 Republicans are vying for their party's blessing to be the state's next senator: West Virginia Governor Jim Justice and Congressman Alex Mooney. Governor Justice is expected to cruise to an easy victory over Mooney. On the Democrat side, 3 West Virginians are competing for the nomination, but none have the storied history and name recognition of Manchin. Finally, voters in Nebraska will also head to the polls. The hottest race in the Republican-leaning state is that of Representative Don Bacon. The swing district he represents is a major battleground heading into the 2024 election. Bacon seems poised to win his re-election bid easily. The Democratic ticket, meantime, is uncontested, with Nebraska State Senator Tony Vargas hurtling towards a rematch with Bacon. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Alphabet's Waymo self-driving vehicles are under investigation. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is probing reports that the robo-taxis can violate traffic safety laws. The regulator said there are 22 incident reports, including 17 collisions. It also cited issues like vehicles driving in the wrong lanes with oncoming traffic and construction zone violations. The agency said in some of those cases, the automated driving systems appeared to disobey traffic safety control devices. Waymo said it was proud of its performance and safety record and has proved its commitment to safety and transparency. The company added it will continue to work with the regulator. The investigation is the first stage before the agency could demand a recall. And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin over at the Sports Hub. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start in sports memorabilia news, where the scheduled auction for Diego Maradona's once-lost Golden Ball trophy has taken quite a turn. What's the latest?
Yeah, the once-lost part has at least been partially solved anyway. Now, the World Cup awards the Golden Ball trophy to the best player in the World Cup tournament. The late Diego Maradona won that in 1986 when he led Argentina to the World Cup title. Shortly after winning it, though, it left his possession, although it's unclear, how or why. Now, Maradona's heirs reportedly told the Associated Press they believe the trophy had been stolen from a bank where it had been stored in a safe. Their legal team is looking to have it withdrawn from the auction, actually. Meanwhile, the auction house, they're expecting this trophy to go for several $1 million. I mean, his World Cup jersey went for $9 million just a year ago. Now, the seller reportedly bought this trophy among several items at an auction house in 2016 without really knowing what he had purchased. Through a very extensive verification process, it was found to actually be the real deal. Anyway, at this point, the auction is still planning to go forward starting on June 6th. This is in Paris, France.
Now moving to WNBA news, former Iowa star Caitlin Clark will make her debut tonight as her Indiana Fever play at the Connecticut Sun. She played in front of sold-out arenas at nearly every stop in college. What's the ticket situation for tonight's game?
Yeah, another sellout, and this is the first home opener sellout for the Connecticut Sun in more than 2 decades, so probably not a coincidence that Caitlin Clark is there. Of course, you can still get tickets on the secondary market. Now, I actually went on to SeatGeek earlier today. I found that the lowest ticket price was over $75. The highest was more than $1,000 for courtside seats. Now compare that with last season. The Suns' average ticket price last year was $45, so quite a difference. Now Forbes had recently reported that the 10 most expensive WNBA games this season all involved her Indiana Fever, and the Fever themselves, they actually doubled their season ticket prices the second that they drafted Clark. So she's had quite an impact already without the season even starting.
Shifting gears now to the NHL playoffs, we have a pair of games on tonight, including a Game 4 in Edmonton, where the Oilers trailed the Canucks 2-1. Now, Edmonton switched goalies during Game 3. What's the situation for tonight?
Yeah, the Oilers are actually going to go with Calvin Pickard. Now, Pickard replaced Stuart Skinner during Game 3, as you alluded to. Skinner allowed 4 goals on 15 shots there. And meanwhile, Edmonton actually outshot them 45-18, but still lost the game 4-3. Now let's take a look at the playoff brackets here. As I just mentioned, this series, Edmonton versus Vancouver, this is going to be Game 4 tonight. Edmonton really needs a win here to tie up the series. Plus, we've got Game 5 tonight between Florida and Boston. Florida's won the last 3 in this series. If they win tonight, they eliminate Boston from the playoffs and they advance to the conference finals.
Looking at the NBA playoffs, we have a pair of games tonight as well, including Game 5 between Denver and Minnesota. The Timberwolves had the Nuggets on the ropes just a week ago after winning the first 2 games in Denver. What's happened since?
Yeah, I mean, they have totally reversed course. They won both games over the weekend in Minnesota to tie this series up. Now, what Minnesota is trying to do here is very difficult. They lost the first 2 games at home, as you mentioned, this is like a week and a half ago. History suggests the Nuggets have just a 17% chance of winning this series. Now, this previously has been done 29 times where the team's lost the first 2 at home. Only 5 have actually come back to win the series. Now, why it's very difficult is because there's only 5 games left. You've got to win 4 of them, and the majority of those games are going to be on the road. So, of course, very difficult. Now, let's look at the playoff bracket here, as we were just talking about. Game 5 tonight between Minnesota and Denver. This is going to be in Denver. Now, the road team has actually won all 4 games so far in this series. We also have Game 5 tonight between Indiana and New York. This has been a very intense series as well. Now, Indiana lost the first 2 games in New York. They did a lot of complaining about the officiating. The series went back to Indiana. They won Games 3 and 4 there. It's Game 5 tonight in New York. I have a strong feeling that if Indiana wins tonight, there'll be no more complaining about the officiating.
Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
Over in Western Canada, the region is reporting one of the season's first major wildfires, and residents are evacuating. An intense wildfire could reach the town of Fort Nelson in British Columbia this week. The fire has spread to over 24,000 acres across Western Canada. The town is largely evacuated. That's more than 4,700 people. A British Columbia official says conditions in the north of the province were extremely challenging. Winds and tinder dry conditions threatened to spread the flames even further. Authorities said there were also 2 significant wildfires in neighboring Alberta. The wildfires are sending smoke plumes over parts of the northern U.S., causing unhealthy air quality levels in parts of Oregon. The federal government last month said Canada faces another catastrophic wildfire season. This is amid forecasts of higher than normal spring and summer temperatures across much of the country. And that's all for today's news. For around-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.